She was on her knees scrubbing his marble floor when he walked in. 6'2", cold as winter steel, the kind of man whose silence could end a life. He looked down at her like she was invisible. Like she was furniture. Like she was nothing. Then he made his first mistake. He leaned close, so close she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive, and he whispered in Spanish, low and deliberate, each word dripping with cruelty, "Get out of my house before I make you disappear, little girl. You don't belong here." He thought she wouldn't understand. He thought she would tremble. He thought she would run. What he didn't know, what he could never have prepared for, was that Lieutenant Amara Osei of the Ghanaian Navy, fluent in 4 languages, decorated twice for bravery under fire, had survived things that would make his entire Mafia organization weep. She slowly set down her scrubbing brush. She rose to her full height, turned to face him with the calmest, most dangerous eyes he had ever seen on a woman, and replied, in perfect, flawless, ice-cold Spanish, "I wasn't talking to you, so don't address me. And if you ever whisper near my ear again without my permission, I will make you disappear. Sir." The room went completely silent. His bodyguards looked at each other. And Park Jae-won, the most feared Mafia boss in all of Seoul, a man no one had dared challenge in 7 years, stood completely still for the first time in his adult life. Because he had no idea what to do with a woman like her. And neither did his heart. Amara Osei had not planned to become a housekeeper. Let that be absolutely clear. 3 months ago, she was Lieutenant Amara Osei, decorated naval officer, the youngest woman to lead a coastal intelligence unit in Ghana's naval history, fluent in English, French, Spanish and Twi, and feared by smugglers from Accra to Marseille. She had medals. She had authority. She had a gun she knew exactly how to use. Now she was in Seoul, South Korea, wearing a pale blue uniform 2 sizes too big, holding a mop like it was a weapon, and wondering how spectacularly her life had imploded. It had started with Captain Mensah's betrayal. Her commanding officer, a man she had trusted with her career, her loyalty, and embarrassingly, a small piece of her heart, had taken credit for a 3-year undercover operation she had built from nothing. Her intelligence. Her contacts. Her sacrifices. He had presented it all to the Admiralty Board with his name stamped across every document. By the time she found out, the promotion was already his. The commendation was already framed on his wall. And Amara Osei was placed on indefinite administrative leave pending a review of conduct. Conduct. Her conduct. She had laughed so hard she cried. Then she had cried so hard she laughed. Then she had packed 1 suitcase, called her cousin Afro, who lived in Seoul teaching Afrobeat dance classes, and boarded the first flight out of Accra. "You need to breathe," Afro had said over the phone. "Come. Korea will heal you." Korea had not healed her. Korea had given her a mop. The domestic staffing agency Afro had connected her with was legitimate. Amara had checked, because she was always checking, always analyzing, old habits from intelligence work dying hard. The agency placed professional housekeepers in high-end residences across Seoul. The pay was extraordinary. The contract was 3 months. The non-disclosure agreement was 17 pages long. That last part should have been her first warning. "The household you are being assigned to," the agency coordinator had said carefully, not quite meeting her eyes, "belongs to a very private gentleman. Very influential. He requires absolute discretion." "I am the definition of discreet," Amara had replied pleasantly. The coordinator had smiled in a way that did not reach her eyes at all. The house, if you could call it a house, the way you might call the ocean a puddle, was located in Songbuk-dong, the most exclusive neighborhood in Seoul. It sat behind iron gates flanked by men who were very clearly not gardeners. The kind of men who wore suits in summer and had earpieces and eyes that catalogued every threat within 50 meters. Amara recognized the posture immediately. She had trained people to stand exactly like that. She catalogued the security setup in 30 seconds out of pure professional instinct. 4 visible guards at the gate. Cameras angled at 15-degree intervals. Motion sensors along the garden wall. Likely 2 more guards she couldn't see yet, 1 at the east corner, 1 inside the entrance hall. She was right on all counts. She found that out later. The inside of the house was the kind of beautiful that felt cold. All clean lines and dark wood and art that probably cost more than her entire naval salary over 10 years. Everything whispered wealth, but nothing whispered warmth. There were no photographs on the walls. No flowers in the vases. No mess, no personality, no sign that any human being actually lived here with joy. It felt like a museum built by someone who had forgotten what happiness looked like. The housekeeper supervisor, a tiny fierce Korean woman named Mrs. Yoon who communicated entirely in clipped sentences and disapproving eyebrow movements, gave Amara a tour in approximately 11 minutes. Kitchen. Pantry. Guest bathrooms 4. Library. Do not touch the books on the 3rd shelf. Gym. Indoor pool. His wing. She stopped at a corridor that stretched to the left, sealed by a heavy door. You never go into his wing unless called. You never speak first. You never ask questions. You do your work. You leave. And who exactly is he? Amara asked. Mrs. Yoon looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a woman who had said too much already simply by standing in this hallway. You'll know when he wants you to know, she said finally. Until then, start with the East Salon. The floors need attention. So Amara had started with the floors. She was 40 minutes into scrubbing, finding a strange meditative peace in the rhythm of it, the way her mind could go quiet when her hands were busy, when the front door opened with the kind of authority that doors reserved for people who never knocked. She didn't look up immediately. She just kept scrubbing. Then the temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. And she looked up. He was not what she expected. She had expected someone older, someone rougher, someone who looked like the villain he almost certainly was. Instead, Park Jae-won, she didn't know his name yet, would learn it later, looked like something a very talented and sadistic artist had designed specifically to be unfair to women with functioning eyes. Sharp jaw. Dark hair that fell slightly across his forehead like he'd just come in from wind. A charcoal suit that had clearly never met a wrinkle. And eyes, dark still and absolutely unreadable, that swept the room with the trained efficiency of someone who had learned long ago that comfort was a luxury and awareness was survival. Those eyes landed on her. And something moved across his face. Not quite surprise, not quite interest. Something quieter than both. Something he extinguished almost before it began. Then he reached for his phone, typed something briefly, and a moment later his head of security appeared at his side. He murmured something in Korean. Amara caught about 60% of it, enough to understand he was asking who had authorized a new housekeeper and why he hadn't been informed. Then, and this was the part she would replay later with tremendous satisfaction, he switched to Spanish. Deliberate. Slow. Cruel. And she felt every single word land exactly as he intended, felt the dismissal in them, the condescension, the assumption that she was nothing but help, that she was here to be used and discarded and certainly not spoken to as an equal. Get out of my house before I make you disappear, little girl. You don't belong here. The mop handle was cool in her hand. The marble was cold under her knees. The room was very, very quiet. Amara Osei set down her scrubbing brush. She stood up. She looked him dead in his gorgeous, arrogant, entirely too handsome face. And she replied. The silence that followed her response lasted exactly 4 seconds. Amara counted. Old naval habit. She measured everything, including the pauses between explosions. For seconds of complete, breathless silence in which Park Jae-won's expression did not change, his body did not move, and his 3 bodyguards who had materialized from various corners of the room looked at each other with the barely concealed panic of men watching their boss navigate completely uncharted territory. Then Jae-won's jaw tightened. Just slightly. Like he had swallowed something unexpected and was deciding whether he liked the taste. Who are you? He asked. In Korean this time. As if rewinding and starting over from a more defensible position. Amara answered in Korean. She'd picked up conversational Korean in 2 months from FUA, YouTube, and the pure stubbornness that had always been her defining characteristic. I'm the housekeeper, she said pleasantly. As you can see from the mop. And the floor, which I was cleaning before you interrupted me. Another pause. One of the bodyguards, a wide man with the build of a refrigerator and the face of someone who had not been surprised in years, made a sound that might have been a strangled laugh immediately converted into a cough. Jae-won's eyes cut to him. The man became a statue. Jae-won looked back at Amara. She looked back at him. This was, she would later reflect, probably the moment that doomed them both. Because in the space of that eye contact, something passed between them that had nothing to do with housekeeping, nothing to do with mafia bosses, and everything to do with the terrifying recognition of meeting someone who was made of the same impossible material as yourself. Stubborn. Brilliant. Unwilling to lose. Not even slightly afraid. He saw it in her. She saw it in him. They both immediately tried to pretend they hadn't seen it. 4 languages, he said finally. It wasn't a question. 5, she corrected. I didn't show you Chui yet. Would you like a demonstration? No. Wise choice. The things I could say to you in Chui would require an apology from you afterward, and I suspect you don't apologize easily. Something shifted in his eyes. Not quite amusement. Not quite. But the cousin of amusement, the very distant relative of it, passing through briefly and pretending it hadn't stopped. Finish the floors, he said. I was finishing them before you interrupted me, she replied. He turned and walked away. His security trailed behind him like a very well-dressed, thoroughly confused shadow. Amara picked up her scrubbing brush. And only when she heard the door to his wing close, firmly, decisively, did she allow herself the smallest, most private, completely unacceptable smile. She told Efua everything that night over jollof rice that Efua insisted on making, which was brave of her because Efua's cooking was a threat to public health. He threatened you in Spanish, Efua repeated, eyes enormous. He tried to, Amara corrected. And you replied in Spanish. Obviously. And then he told you to keep cleaning. After approximately 30 seconds of looking at me like I had grown a second head, yes. Efua pointed her wooden spoon at Amara. The spoon had some kind of sauce on it that had turned an alarming color. Amara. My love. My cousin. The man is Park Jae-won. I gathered he was important. He is not important. Efua set down the spoon. She looked at Amara with the expression of someone about to deliver news that required sitting down. He is the head of the Hwan organization. Do you know what the Hwan organization is? Amara thought of the 17-page NDA. The guards with the earpieces. The security setup that her professional instincts had catalogued automatically at the gate. Mafia, she said simply. Not just Mafia. The Mafia. In Seoul. The one that makes the other Mafias behave. Efua sat down across from her. Amara. He has made men disappear. That was not a metaphor when he said it to you. He meant it literally. Amara considered this information for a moment. She thought about Captain Mensah, who had stolen her career and was currently being celebrated at a ceremony she should have attended. She thought about the Navy, which had told her to wait quietly while they reviewed her conduct. She thought about all the things she had survived. Smugglers, corrupt officials, 3 years undercover in situations that had given her nightmares she refused to acknowledge. She picked up her fork. The jollof is burning, she said. Amara. It's fine, Efua. He's just a man. Efua stared at her. He is a very dangerous man. All the interesting ones are. She reached over and turned off the burner. Now serve the rice before it becomes charcoal and you blame me. Efua served the rice. She also, very quietly, started praying. What Amara did not tell Efua, what she barely admitted to herself in the dark of her small borrowed bedroom that night, was that her hands had been shaking slightly when she replied to him in Spanish. Not from fear. From something far more inconvenient. Park Jae-won, she thought at the ceiling, was the most dangerously beautiful man she had ever seen in her 29 years of life. And she had been in the Navy, which was not short of beautiful men. But none of them had looked at her the way he had looked at her in the moment after she spoke. Like she was a problem he very much wanted to solve. Like she was the most interesting variable in an equation he hadn't expected to encounter. Like she had somehow, inexplicably, become the only thing in the room worth looking at. It was absolutely terrible. She was on administrative leave from a career she had given everything to. She was in a foreign country. She was cleaning floors. She could not be attracted to her Mafia boss employer. She absolutely was not going to think about his jaw. She thought about his jaw for approximately 40 minutes before she fell asleep. Chapter 3: The Rules, the Rebellion, and the Roses. Mrs. Yoon had rules. Many rules. Rules that had been printed, laminated, and presented to Amara on her second morning with the gravity of sacred scripture. Rule 1: Never speak to Mr. Park unless spoken to. Rule 2: Never enter Mr. Park's private study. Rule 3: Never comment on household visitors regardless of how many of them arrived at midnight carrying briefcases. Rule 4: Never ask about the East Garden after dark. Rule 5: Maintain absolute schedule discipline. Mr. Park's household ran on precision. Amara had read every rule carefully and nodded respectfully at each one. She had then, within 48 hours, broken rules 1, 3, and 5 in a single incident that Mrs. Yoon referred to afterward only as the flower situation, and refused to discuss further. It had started innocently enough. Amara had been arranging the formal dining room, the room that was clearly never used for actual dining by any actual human being who enjoyed meals, and she had noticed that the elaborate flower arrangement on the centerpiece table was dead. Not slightly wilting. Not past its best. Truly, comprehensively, embarrassingly dead. She had thrown it away. She had gone to the kitchen garden, which she had discovered on her first morning and which was clearly tended by someone with actual passion because it was the only part of the property that felt alive. She had cut fresh flowers, deep red and bright yellow, bold colors that had nothing to do with the sterile beige and gray of the house, and she had arranged them herself in the large crystal vase. She had stood back and looked at them. The color looked like home. Like Accra market mornings, like the fabric her mother wore to church, like the kind of joy that forced itself into spaces that had forgotten what it felt like. She was still standing back, looking at them with entirely too much satisfaction for someone holding a pair of garden shears, when Jae-won walked in. He stopped. He looked at the flowers. He looked at her. The other arrangement, he began, was deceased, Amara said. I gave it a proper send-off. His eyes moved back to the flowers. Something in his expression did a complicated thing. Tightened, then released, then tightened again, like a language he was trying not to speak. The household has a florist, he said carefully. The florist has terrible taste, she replied. Those flowers you had in here were beige. Who buys beige flowers? That is not a color that occurs in nature with any enthusiasm. The bodyguard in the corner, the refrigerator-shaped one whose name she had learned was Day, made the strangled laugh converted to cough sound again. Jae-won did not look at him this time. He was still looking at Amara. You are very opinionated for someone who works for me, he said. I am very opinionated for someone who works for anyone, she replied pleasantly. It's one of my most consistent qualities. Is it a Ghanaian thing? He asked. And then, as if he surprised himself, he stopped. Like he hadn't meant to reveal that he'd looked into her background. Amara felt something warm move through her chest. She kept her expression serene. It's a me thing, she said. Though Ghana does produce exceptional people, so possibly both. Another silence. But this one was different. This one had texture. Leave the flowers, he said finally. And he left. That was the day Day started nodding at her in the hallway. Not a friendly nod. A respectful nod. The kind of nod given by one professional to another who has demonstrated competence in a field. She learned piece by piece, from the small army of people who moved through that household, kitchen staff, security rotations, Mrs. Yoon's. Occasional moments of humanity when she thought no one was watching. That Park Jae-won had been back in Seoul for 6 weeks after 4 years abroad. That the house had been staffed and maintained in his absence by a skeleton crew. That he had arrived with new security protocols, new rules, and the reputation of a man who had done things in those 4 years that his own organization spoke about only in careful, lowered voices. She also learned that no one in the house had ever spoken back to him. Not once. Not ever. Not in Spanish, Korean, English, or any other language. She found this information surprising only in the sense that it seemed remarkably inefficient. How did anyone know what he actually needed if no one ever told him when he was wrong? How did any household run smoothly on a foundation of people nodding yes at things that were no? She mentioned this to Mrs. Yoon, who looked at her for a very long time and then said something in Korean that translated roughly as, "You are a very strange woman and I am not sure whether to admire you or pray for you." "Both seem reasonable," Amara said. Mrs. Yoon walked away. But there was something in her posture, some slight, grudging softness, that had not been there the day before. Amara noted it the way she noted everything. Filed it. Added it to her growing understanding of this household, this man, this strange cold beautiful house that was slowly becoming, against all logic, somewhere she wanted to be. That realization terrified her considerably more than the Mafia did. She was in the kitchen that evening. She'd taken to spending her break there because the head chef, a cheerful man named Chef Bong who took her interest in Korean food as a personal mission, had been teaching her to make doenjang jjigae, when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Korean area code. She answered with the caution of someone trained to be cautious. "You left your scrubbing brush in the east corridor." Her whole body went still. It was him. He had her number. He had called her personally to tell her about a scrubbing brush. "I know," she said, after a beat. "I was coming back for it. Mrs. Yoon will confiscate it if she sees it. She has opinions about tools left in corridors. She has opinions about everything." Yes. A pause. Not uncomfortable. Just present. Breathing. "She respects you." "She shows it unusually," Amara said. Something that might have been a laugh. Brief. Quiet. Gone before she could confirm it. "Good night, Ms. Osei." "Good night, Mr. Park." The line went silent. Amara held the phone for a moment. Then she went and retrieved her scrubbing brush. And she stood in the east corridor holding it, doing absolutely nothing, for a little longer than necessary. It started with an order and ended with an argument, and somewhere in the middle became the best evening of her entire time in Seoul. He summoned her, through Mrs. Yoon, which felt like an insult until Mrs. Yoon explained in her clipped way that he summoned everyone through her, it was not personal, to the formal dining room at 7 in the evening. Amara arrived expecting to be given instructions about something. Perhaps the flowers again. Perhaps new cleaning protocols. Perhaps some fresh list of rules that would be laminated by morning. Instead, the table was set for 2. She stopped in the doorway. Her flowers were still in the centerpiece vase, bright and bold, looking slightly triumphant. Jae-won was already seated, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, reading something on his phone with the focus of a man who had forgotten how to not be working. He looked up when she entered. "Sit," he said. "Where?" she asked, because there were 12 chairs at the table and she was not going to assume. He gestured to the chair across from him. She sat. Her posture was perfect. Old naval training made slouching physically impossible for her in uncertain situations. "You can cook," he said. "I can do many things," she replied carefully. "Chef Bong tells me you've been learning Korean cuisine." She felt a flicker of, not panic, she didn't panic, but something adjacent. Is that against the rules? Mrs. Yoon's laminated document didn't specifically cover culinary education. "It's not against the rules." He set his phone face down on the table, which she was beginning to understand was significant. He was always working, always connected, and putting the phone down meant he had decided to be present. For whatever this was. "He says you have good instincts." "I have good instincts in general," she said. "Is that also from Ghana?" "That one is from the Navy," she said. And there it was, the thing she hadn't meant to say. The Navy. Her real self, slipping through the carefully maintained disguise of housekeeper, scrubbing brush, pale blue uniform. His eyes sharpened. Just slightly. The way eyes sharpened when information confirmed something suspected. "Navy," he said. "Former," she said. "How former?" "Recent." A pause. The food arrived, brought by kitchen staff who moved with the efficiency of people who had been trained not to look at whatever was happening at this table. "Why are you here?" he asked. Not hostile. Genuinely asking. Like someone who had been wondering and had decided to simply inquire. Amara looked at her food, a beautiful spread of Korean dishes that Chef Bong had clearly put real love into, and considered what to say. She was a trained intelligence officer. She knew how to give partial truths that satisfied questions without exposing vulnerabilities. She had done it in hostile territories with actual lives at stake. She looked up at Park Jae-won, who was watching her with dark eyes that she suspected saw considerably more than most people realized. "My commanding officer stole 3 years of my work," she said. "And I needed somewhere to be that wasn't there while I decided what came next." Silence. "I'm sorry," he said. She blinked. She had not expected that. "That happens," she said. "People take credit for other people's work. It still deserves an apology, even from a stranger." He picked up his chopsticks. "Eat. Chef Bong will know if you don't, and he'll take it personally." She ate. And something shifted, something small and significant and completely irreversible, in the atmosphere between them. They talked. She was not entirely sure how it happened. It began with food. She asked about a dish. He explained it with more enthusiasm than she suspected he intended. She made a comment that made him pause mid-explanation and look at her with something that was unmistakably surprise. And then they were talking about Seoul versus Accra, about the ocean, about what it felt like to be responsible for other people's safety, about the strange loneliness of authority, about languages and what you could say in one that you couldn't say in another. He spoke 4 languages himself. She felt unreasonably pleased that they were matched. "You learned Korean in 2 months," he said, at some point when the food was largely finished and neither of them had moved to end the evening. 2 months and 11 days, she corrected. "It took me 6 months to reach conversation level in Spanish." "I'm competitive," she said. "And I had a lot of time on the flight here to listen to audio lessons." A 12-hour flight. 14, with the layover. "I also did French review and started Swahili basics." He looked at her for a long moment with an expression that had quietly, without permission, stopped being the carefully controlled face of a Mafia boss and started being something more human. Something warmer. Something that had no business looking at her from across a dining table in a house full of armed guards. "Why housekeeping?" he asked. "The agency had immediate placement," she said. "And I needed to be useful or I would go insane with sitting still." "You could have found something that used your actual skills." "I did," she said. "I found something that kept my hands busy while my mind worked. Very useful combination." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you working on something?" he asked carefully. She smiled at him, not her professional smile, not her pleasant and unthreatening smile, but her real one, the one that Afro said was terrifying because it meant you were already several steps ahead. "Always," she said. It was not a lie. She just hadn't decided yet what exactly she was working on. Though the answer, she suspected, was becoming less about her career and more about the man sitting across from her who had just spent 3 hours telling her things she strongly suspected he had not told anyone else in a very long time. She saw the other side of him 9 days later. She wasn't supposed to see it. She had been breaking Rule 4, the East Garden After Dark rule, for what she privately categorized as research purposes and what anyone else would categorize as insomnia-driven wandering. The garden at night was extraordinary. Seoul's lights caught the edges of everything, and the garden, with its careful stone paths and small reflecting pool, felt like a world entirely separate from the house and its weight. She'd taken to sitting on a particular bench near the far wall with a cup of tea, thinking through her options, letting her mind run the kind of calculations it needed quiet to make. She was on the bench when the cars arrived. 3 of them. Black. No plates she could see from her angle. They came through the service entrance on the garden's west side, a gate she'd clocked on her second day but assumed was for deliveries. She went still in the way she'd been trained to go still. No movement. Controlled breathing. Eyes processing. 8 men got out of the cars. They carried things, not weapons or not obviously, but the case one of them held had the particular careful handling of something important. They were met by Day and 2 other security staff she knew by face now. There was a brief exchange, clipped and professional. And then Jae-won came through the garden door. He was different. She had seen him controlled. She had seen him almost warm. She had seen him surprised and quiet and unexpectedly human over a dining table. This was none of those things. This Jae-won was the person those things were a temporary softening of. He moved through the group like gravity, like something that organized everything around it automatically. His face was completely expressionless in the way that faces were only expressionless when the person wearing them had decided to be dangerous. He spoke to the lead arrival, brief, quiet, authoritative. The man responded. Jae-won listened, nodded once, and then said something that made 3 of the 8 men look briefly, genuinely afraid. It was over in 6 minutes. The cars left. Dae escorted the remaining men inside. Jae-won stood alone in the garden for a moment, his back to the bench where Amara sat completely still in the dark. He turned around. He saw her immediately. She had expected him to be angry. She had been prepared for anger. She had a response ready, calm and unapologetic, because she did not apologize for having eyes or using them. Instead, he looked at her for a long moment. "You're breaking Rule 4, he said. "I have insomnia," she said. "The garden helps." "What did you see?" "Business," she said. "I'm not interested in your business, Mr. Park. I have my own complications." He walked to the bench. He stood in front of her. This close, she could see that the controlled dangerous expression had not entirely dropped. It was still there, underneath the more familiar surface, like something that lived in him permanently and just spent most of its time in a quieter room. "You should be afraid of me," he said. Not a threat. Almost a question. "I've been afraid of genuinely terrible things," she said. "You're not one of them." Something moved across his face. Something that cracked the controlled expression without breaking it entirely. "That's either the bravest thing anyone has said to me," he said, "or the most uninformed." "I'm very well informed," she said. "I did research. On me. On my situation. You're part of my situation." He sat down on the bench. Not close. But not far. The calculated not far of someone who had made a decision and was not yet fully admitting to it. "Your insomnia," he said. "How long?" "Since the Navy," she said. "Better here than at home. Something about the time zone." "I don't sleep well either," he said. And then, like he'd said something he hadn't meant to, "The East Garden helps." She looked at him sideways. "That's why there's a Rule 4. "Yes." "So you made a rule to keep people out of the place that helps you so you could have it to yourself. Is that unreasonable?" "It's lonely," she said. The word landed between them. He didn't deny it. They sat in the garden together in silence for a while. Not the silence of strangers, but the silence of people who had discovered, slightly to their alarm, that they were comfortable in each other's quiet. Seoul hummed softly beyond the walls. The reflecting pool caught the lights. "Come," he said finally, standing. She raised an eyebrow. "I want to show you something," he said. "You have good taste in flowers. I want to know if you have good taste in other things." She stood. "This is how horror films start," she observed. "I'm taking you to the library," he said, deadpan. "Not particularly horrifying. You'd be surprised what people hide in libraries." She followed him inside. The library was the one room in the house she'd been told not to touch, specifically the 3rd shelf. It was also the one room that had immediately felt like it held something real. Floor-to-ceiling shelves in dark wood. Worn spines that had clearly been read and reread. A desk with actual clutter on it. Papers, 2 coffee cups, a pen that had leaked slightly and stained the edge of a notebook. "The 3rd shelf," she said immediately. "Obviously," he said. She went to it. He let her. The books there were different from the others. Some Korean, some in English, some in Spanish, one in French. But the thing that made her stop was the small framed photograph tucked between 2 volumes. A younger version of him, much younger, maybe 16, standing with a woman who had his eyes and the warmest smile Amara had ever seen on a human face. She looked at it for a long moment. "Your mother," she said. "Yes." "She's beautiful." "Yes," he said, quieter. She turned to look at him. He was looking at the photograph with the expression of someone who had learned, very thoroughly, not to look like they were hurting. She recognized it because she wore it herself sometimes, when she thought about her own mother, who was alive and well and calling her every Sunday from Accra and whose voice made everything simultaneously better and worse. Is she began. Alive, he said. In Busan. I haven't seen her in 2 years. Amara said nothing. Because sometimes the most useful thing was to let silence do the work that words couldn't. He looked at her. She looked at him. The library was warm and book-scented, and the rest of the house with its guards and its rules and its complicated weight seemed very far away. Dance with me, she said suddenly. He blinked. There's no music. She pulled out her phone. She found the playlist, Ghanaian Highlife, smooth and warm and built for evenings exactly like this, and pressed play. Now there is, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he took her hand. He was not a bad dancer. Not trained, not flashy, but with the natural rhythm of someone who had music somewhere in him that he'd never quite let out. She led initially, showing him the easy sway of it, and he followed with the focus of someone who learned quickly and was slightly annoyed at not already knowing. She laughed. It surprised her, real, unguarded, the laugh she saved for Efua and her mother. It surprised him too. He looked at her laughing face with the expression of someone who had just encountered something they had not included in any plan or calculation. You have a terrible laugh, he said. I have an excellent laugh, she replied, still laughing. You're confusing excellent with contagious. Something happened to his face. He smiled. Not the almost there thing she'd glimpsed before. A real smile, brief and devastating, changing everything about him in the 3 seconds it existed. Amara made a mental note to never under any circumstances fall in love with this man. She was going to need to make that note several more times before the night was over. He called it showing her soul. Amara called it a date from approximately the moment he told her to be ready at 9 in the morning and arrived personally at her door wearing something other than a suit for the first time in her experience of him. Dark jeans, a clean dark shirt, looking criminally unfair in a completely civilian way. She was wearing a yellow wrap dress that she'd bought from a vendor near Efua's neighborhood, her hair twisted up with a golden pin her mother had given her, the specific expression of a woman who was not trying but had in fact thought about this outfit for 40 minutes. He looked at her and then looked quickly at something behind her head with the focused attention of a man who needed to organize his face. She decided not to comment on this. No bodyguards? She asked instead. 2, he said. Not visible. Don't worry about them. I wasn't worried about them, she said. I was going to say you're missing the full entourage experience. He looked at her. I'm kidding, she said pleasantly. Let's go. He took her to Bukshan Hanok village first, the traditional Hanok houses clinging to the hillside, old and beautiful and defiant against the modern city pressing in from every direction. She walked slowly through it, unhurried, touching the wooden walls gently, reading the informational placards in Korean that he watched her read with that quiet attention he gave her without seeming to realize he was doing it. This is what 400 years looks like, she said. In Ghana, 400 years looks different. Red earth and fortress walls and the sea. But it's the same feeling. Something that survived when it shouldn't have. He was quiet for a moment. Tell me about it. So she did. She told him about Cape Coast, the castle by the sea, the history it held, the complicated grief and beauty of a place that meant different things to different people. She told him about Accra's markets and the way sound and color and smell hit you simultaneously, and how she missed it like a physical thing sometimes, the noise of it. He listened the way he did everything, completely. 4 years, she said eventually. You were away for 4 years. Where? Various places, he said. She looked at him sideways. That's not an answer. Tokyo. Amsterdam. Dubai. A pause. Work. Mafia work. You say that very casually. I have a high threshold for dramatic, she said. Navy, remember? He almost smiled. The organization was expanding. New agreements. New territories. It required presence. And now you're back. Now I'm back. And building something, she said. Because she had been paying attention, the midnight meetings, the careful security, the way the household operated less like a home base and more like a command center. New infrastructure. New alliances. Something bigger than what existed before. He stopped walking. He looked at her with an expression that was no longer the almost smile, but something sharper and more direct. You observe everything, he said. Occupational hazard, she said. I spent 3 years tracking smuggling networks along West Africa's coast. I notice patterns. That's what you were doing undercover, he said. Not a question. That's what I was doing undercover, she confirmed. They were standing in a quiet courtyard, filtered sunlight and the distant sounds of the city, and the 2 invisible bodyguards were being very professional somewhere they couldn't be seen. The person who stole your work, he said carefully. Do you want him to face consequences? The question was asked with absolute neutrality. The kind of neutrality that contained multitudes. Amara held his gaze. I want justice through proper channels, she said clearly. I have friends in the Admiralty who are working on it. It will take time, but it will happen. And if proper channels fail? They won't, she said. But if they did, I am perfectly capable of handling my own battles, Mr. Park. Jae-won, he said. She blinked. You've been calling me Mr. Park for 3 weeks, he said. Use my name. Her heart did something entirely unauthorized. Jae-won, she said. He seemed to settle something internally when she said it. Like a tension he hadn't been aware of releasing. Amara, he said. Testing it. Like learning the right weight to give each syllable. That's me, she said lightly, because she needed to say something ordinary or she was going to do something inadvisable. They had lunch at a small place he clearly knew personally. The owner greeted him with warmth that cut through his usual effect on people, the warmth of genuine long acquaintance. They ate haejanguk and banchan and she tried things she'd never had before and made faces that apparently entertained him considerably because he kept watching her expressions with something that had graduated from almost amusement to actual, quiet delight. She fed him a piece of something from her plate, leaning across the table with her chopsticks because she wanted him to try it, and only when she was already doing it did she register that this was an extremely intimate gesture for a woman who was supposed to be his housekeeper. He ate it from her chopsticks without hesitation. They looked at each other. Good, he said. Yes, she agreed. Neither of them was talking about the food. Chef Bong knew. He had the discretion of someone who had worked in this household for 3 years and understood that discretion was what kept him employed, but he had a face that communicated everything his mouth refused to say, and for the 2 weeks following the day that was a date, his face communicated approximately, I see what's happening here and I support it and I will cook things that facilitate it. The kitchen became a meeting point. Not deliberately. Or perhaps deliberately, but in the way that things become deliberate when 2 people are too intelligent to pretend they aren't choosing to be in the same room at the same time for reasons other than the stated ones. Jae-won had coffee at 7 every morning. Amara had tea at 7:15. The 15-minute gap, which had existed for 3 weeks, quietly dissolved. They had coffee and tea together in the kitchen while Chef Bong made breakfast and radiated satisfaction. They talked about everything. She discovered he had opinions about architecture that were passionate and specific and surprisingly idealistic for a man in his profession. He discovered she had read more military history than most military historians and had very firm views about strategic errors in conflicts that he found himself arguing about for longer than he'd spent arguing about anything in years. They argued often. This was one of Amara's great pleasures. He was not a man who collapsed under disagreement, who managed her or humored her or softened his positions because she pushed back. He pushed back. He was occasionally infuriatingly right. She was more occasionally and more infuriatingly right. They were both acutely aware of keeping score. You conceded the point about Inchan, she said one morning, 8 days into the kitchen ritual. I updated my position in response to new evidence, he said. That's different from conceding. It's conceding with extra steps. It's intellectual honesty. You're doing it again, she said. Doing what? Reframing losing as a character quality. He looked at her over his coffee with the expression he reserved specifically for her, the one she'd started thinking of as the "you are genuinely extraordinary and that is deeply inconvenient" face. You're very combative in the morning, he said. I'm very combative at all times, she said. You've just been experiencing it in concentrated form because we keep ending up in the same room. We don't keep ending up in the same room, he said. We choose to be in the same room. Silence. Yes, she said quietly. We do. Another silence, warmer this time. Chef Bong dropped a pan. He picked it up immediately and looked at the ceiling as if it was entirely unrelated to him. The complication arrived on a Tuesday. A woman. Late 30s, Korean, spectacularly beautiful in the particular way of someone who had always known they were beautiful and had organized their personality around it. She arrived at the front door at 2 in the afternoon with the confidence of someone who had been here before, many times, and expected to continue doing so. Mrs. Yoon, unusually, came to find Amara rather than handle the visitor herself. There is a guest, she said, with the clipped tone of someone giving information they found personally offensive. Ms. Park Jae-won. She has a standing arrangement. Amara was making up the guest rooms. She kept making up the guest rooms. All right, she said. Mrs. Yoon lingered. Amara looked at her. She will be staying for dinner, Mrs. Yoon said. I'll let Chef Bong know, Amara said pleasantly. Mrs. Yoon lingered another moment, her expression doing something complicated. She is an old connection, she said carefully. Of Mr. Park's. She visits sometimes. It is not, she stopped. Started again. It has not been significant for some time. But she believes otherwise. Amara looked at Mrs. Yoon for a moment. Then she smiled, not the real smile, the serene one. Thank you, Mrs. Yoon, she said. I'll ensure the guest room is fully prepared. Mrs. Yoon nodded sharply and left. Amara went back to making the bed. She made it with great attention to hospital corners. She ran into Ji-yeon in the hallway at 4. Ji-yeon stopped and looked at her with the particular assessment of a woman categorizing a perceived complication. You're new, Ji-yeon said in Korean. 3 weeks, Amara agreed pleasantly. Ji-yeon looked her over. Amara let her look, standing still with the patience of someone who had been assessed by people considerably more intimidating and survived all of them. Jae-won mentioned a new housekeeper who was unusual, Ji-yeon said. He had mentioned her. Amara catalogued this information. I try to be useful, Amara said. Ji-yeon smiled. It did not reach her eyes. He's very particular about his household. Don't mistake his attention for anything more than that. He's attentive with anything in his space that interests him. It doesn't mean anything personal. I appreciate the guidance, Amara said. She finished making the guest room. She spent the evening in the kitchen with Chef Bong, learning to make gamjatang, and steadfastly not thinking about Ji-yeon or the dinner she was having with Jae-won or what standing arrangement meant in the context of a mafia boss's life. At 9:15, a knock at the kitchen door. Jae-won stood there in his dinner clothes, looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. She's gone, he said. I wasn't waiting, Amara said. I know, he said. I am telling you anyway. He came into the kitchen. Sat at the counter with the ease of someone who had decided this was his. She and I have not been anything in 3 years. She has not accepted this. I am sorry you had to navigate her. Amara looked at him. I didn't navigate her, she said. I made a bed and learned to cook gamjatang. It was a perfectly fine afternoon. He looked at her for a long moment. You're remarkable, he said. Quietly. Like it had escaped. She held his gaze. Jae-won, she said. Amara. If you're about to say something important, she said carefully, say it in Spanish. I want to make sure I get every word. Something cracked completely open in his expression, and he laughed. An actual laugh, real and warm and slightly helpless, filling the kitchen in a way that made Chef Bong, who had been pretending to organize spices at the far counter, go very still with joy. Amara had never heard him laugh before. She decided immediately that she would spend considerable effort making it happen again. He didn't say it in Spanish. He said it in the East Garden, 3 nights later in Korean, while Seoul glowed softly beyond the walls and the reflecting pool was perfectly still. They had been sitting in their separate corners of the bench. There was a established bench geometry now, their respective territories defined by weeks of late evenings and insomniac hours, when he said, I don't know how to do this. She looked at him. Do what? She asked, though she knew. She knew exactly what. This, he said. He gestured between them with the frustrated imprecision of a very precise man running out of appropriate language. Whatever this is. It's called talking to someone, she said gently. I talk to people. You give orders to people and you negotiate with people and you occasionally terrify people, she said. That's different. He was quiet. My life, he said slowly, is not a safe place to be. I know, she said. The risk. I'm a naval officer, she said. Risk is my primary language. Former naval officer. The former is administrative, she said. I'm still me. He turned to look at her fully. The garden light caught his face and for a moment she saw everything. The control, the weight, the specific loneliness of someone who had chosen a life that put walls around him and had begun, somewhere along the way, to mind the walls. I haven't wanted something like this in a long time, he said. I don't know what to do with it. She moved across the bench. Closed the careful distance they'd been maintaining. She took his hand. He looked at their hands. Then we figure it out, she said. One conversation at a time. One kitchen morning at a time. I'm not asking you for certainty. I'm asking you for honesty. Those two things, he said carefully, are not always the same in my world. In mine either, she said. But we can try. He turned his hand over. Held hers properly. He spoke in Spanish then. Low and careful and nothing like the first time. I see you, he said. All of you. I don't know what that means yet, but I know it's true. She answered in Spanish. I see you too. The dangerous parts and the human parts. I'm not afraid of either. He looked at her for a long, unguarded moment. Then he brought her hand to his lips. Brief. A question more than a statement. Dinner, he said. Tomorrow. Not the dining room. Somewhere in the city. A real dinner. A real dinner, she repeated. With reservations, he said. And a table with candles. And no laminated rules involved. She smiled. Mrs. Yoon will be devastated. Mrs. Yoon will survive. He stood, and she stood with him, and they were very close in the garden light. 7 o'clock. Wear something. I will wear exactly what I want, she said pleasantly. Obviously, he said. I was going to say wear something warm. The restaurant is near the river. She looked at him. He looked at her. Good night, Amara, he said. Good night, Jae-won, she said. She walked inside first. And in the garden, alone for a moment, Park Jae-won stood very still and looked at the reflecting pool and understood, with the clarity of a man who had spent years being clear-eyed about difficult things, that he was in very serious trouble. The kind you didn't want to get out of. The restaurant was extraordinary. Not in a cold beautiful way like his house. In a warm beautiful way, low lights and the Han River visible through floor-to-ceiling windows and the kind of attentive service that was professional without being oppressive. She wore the yellow dress again and a different pin in her hair, and he was waiting for her at the entrance in a suit that had clearly been chosen with unusual care. He looked at her. She looked at him. You wore the yellow, he said. I told you I'd wear what I wanted, she said. This is what I wanted. He offered her his arm. She took it. His jaw did something. She decided not to comment. It was the best dinner of her life. This was an objective fact that she would have acknowledged even if she hadn't been slightly, catastrophically, falling for the man across the table. The food was extraordinary. The conversation was extraordinary. He ordered things for her to try and she ordered things for him, and they ate from each other's plates with the easy intimacy of people who had somehow skipped several months of getting to know you and arrived somewhere warmer faster than either had planned. He told her about Busan. She told him about the coast of Ghana. He told her, carefully, about why he hadn't seen his mother in 2 years. A protection measure, distance as armor, the specific math of a dangerous man calculating how to keep the people he loved from becoming leverage. She listened and did not fill the silence with false comfort. She simply listened, and he seemed to understand that her listening was itself a kind of care. She told him about the 3 years undercover. Not all of it, some of it was still classified and some of it was still too close, but enough. The fear she hadn't shown. The loneliness. The particular way that protecting others required making yourself invisible in ways that accumulated quietly. "You and I," he said at some point, wine glasses half empty and the river dark and glittering beyond the window, "have spent a very long time making ourselves into exactly what other people needed and forgetting to want things for ourselves." She looked at him. "That's very perceptive," she said. "I have my moments." "More than you let on," she said. "Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation." She laughed. He watched her laugh like it was something he was memorizing. "Amara," he said. Jae-won. "I would like very much to kiss you," he said. In Spanish. Very carefully. Completely differently from the first time Spanish had been spoken between them. She answered in Spanish, equally careful. "I've been thinking about it for 3 weeks," she said. "I was beginning to wonder when you'd get there." He reached across the table and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with a gentleness that didn't belong in the resume of a man who made other men afraid. "Later," he said. "When I take you home." "You're making me wait," she said. "Good things are worth waiting for," he said. "That's either very romantic or very annoying." "Yes," he agreed. She was laughing when they walked out of the restaurant. He had said something. She would not remember later exactly what, just that it was the rare kind of deadpan that worked because he delivered it with a completely straight face, and she was still laughing when she saw the car. The black SUV parked across the street. The man leaning against it. Her laughter stopped. Not because of the man, though she clocked him, tall and Korean and looking at Jae-won with the stillness of someone delivering a message, but because of the woman beside him. 50s. Silver-streaked hair. Jae-won's eyes in an older, fiercer face. The warmest smile Amara had ever seen in a photograph, made real and present and looking between her son and this Ghanaian woman in a yellow dress with an expression of perfectly contained maternal calculation. Jae-won had gone completely still. "Ioma," he said. One word. But it held 4 years of distance and complicated love and the specific devastation of a man encountering something he hadn't prepared for. His mother looked at Amara. Amara looked back. The older woman said something in Korean, quiet and deliberate, that made Jae-won's security team look at each other with barely contained alarm. She said, "So this is why you finally came home." And then she looked at Amara directly, and said, in perfect, unaccented Spanish, "I'd like to have breakfast with you tomorrow morning. Alone. Without my son, who will obviously try to interfere." Amara heard Jae-won inhale sharply beside her. She looked at the mother of the Korean Mafia boss in whose house she cleaned floors, in the city she'd run to when her career collapsed, with the man she had not planned to want standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the night air. She smiled, the real one. "I would love that," she said. In Spanish. "What time?" And somewhere beside her, she heard Park Jae-won say, very quietly, in the voice of a man who had just lost control of something he hadn't known he was holding, "This is not going to go the way I planned." She didn't look at him. She was too busy shaking hands with his mother. But she was smiling. She didn't know in that moment that his mother had not come to Seoul alone. She didn't know about the letter that had been delivered that afternoon to the Hwon organization's primary address. A letter with a South Korean naval intelligence stamp and Lieutenant Amara Osei's name on the return address. She didn't know that someone had found her. She didn't know that the someone who had found her was not her ally. She didn't know that by tomorrow morning, Park Jae-won would be standing between her and something that neither his money nor his power had fully prepared him for. But she would find out. Very soon. Will Jae-won's mother approve of Amara? Or does she know something about Amara's past that changes everything? Who sent the letter with Naval Intelligence's seal? And what do they want with Amara? And now that Jae-won has decided to fight for her, who exactly will he have to fight? Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and drop a comment. Are you Team Amara, Team Jae-won, or completely destroyed by both of them? Tell me where you're watching from and let's get to part 2.